Hi, I'm Justin Moorman.
And I'm Katie Thornton, and this is the Re-Education of Schools podcast,
where we have open, honest conversations about how to better understand social emotional learning, trauma-informed care, the whys behind student behavior, and how to help kids navigate it all as they go through school and life. All right, welcome to episode 11, Look at Me Now, Restoring and Repairing. This is actually just kind of a continuation from episode 9, which was already a two-parter. We felt like we didn't want to be like, now episode 9, part 46. Turns out we actually just have a podcast now about crisis, and we're going to start that on a different forum. So if you want to join in on that. No, this is really still part of it. We knew that we were running long, and we wanted to continue kind of talking about that post-crisis part a little bit more, and really some of the restoring and repairing. We'll see how long we talk during this one. I don't know. We're going to find out.
Let's make it happen.
By episode 11, turns out we're getting a lot looser with how we record these episodes. And it might be, who knows what we're in for. I'm just impressed we made it to episode 11.
I know, way to go.
All right, so we talked a lot in episode 9 as a kind of a recap about some of the stuff you do before a crisis, like preparing. Why we even need this, to get ready for a crisis, and then what happens during a crisis, which I think we spent a kind of a bulk of our time. Weirdly, since we also said that most of our time should be spent in prevention, right? Like we really landed there. Most of our time should be spent trying to prevent crisis in the first place and preparing ourselves to be able to avoid them over just responding to them. We never want to just be very responsive. We want to be proactive. I think in education as a whole, that's like the mindset, right? We should be proactive. We should be doing things on the front end as opposed to always just responding to things that are happening in front of us. Well, it's no different when we talk about students that are in crisis. So most of our time should be spent there, but we did spend a lot of time talking just because people a lot of times don't know what to do, I think, in a crisis. It's very intense and can be very overwhelming, especially if it's not something that happens a lot. Maybe you're in a district or in a building in a district that just doesn't have a lot of crisis that comes up. And so when it does, it can be really overwhelming. People kind of almost panic. A lot of chickens running around with their heads cut off, which is not what you want. That actually is not helpful in a crisis. And then we talked a little bit about just the ending, like what are some things that we can do. And we knew just with time, we were going to kind of keep talking about that this time. So here we are, episode 11. Yeah. Why do you feel like this part of restoring and repairing after kind of a crisis or a big moment is so important? Why is this an important part in that continuum of a crisis and then also in discipline as a whole?
Yeah. So I do a little research as I do before we do our episodes.
Hit us with the research.
So here we go. Instead of punitive discipline, restorative practices is essentially what we're going to be talking about. Or, that plan B with kids, as if you're into Dr. Ross Green's work, right? In education, promote a positive mindset and change in teachers and students. Educators should implement these practices to foster and maintain mutual respect, resolve problems through a supportive environment, and make positive changes. So if we're really looking at the lens shift of discipline is what intervention needs to happen, what experience does this child need, if we're really trying to correct behavior based upon neuroscience research, then these are some things that need to happen. We need to start having these conversations. This is a step we chronically forget. We do not do this, and this is the part that is going to be the shift in discipline. Because I think we've heard discipline's good. We need to have boundaries, but we need to start preparing kids to come back and return or to make like amends with the situation. And we chronically just do the suspension. The kid comes back and no one ever speaks to about the situation. And then we're wondering why we're in this like chronic cycle of things still happening because we've never had those teachable moments or even talked through things with kids to kind of make those plans or to like their anxiety, the kids' anxieties for them coming back and really teaching this. And I think we talked about this a little bit, like as our generation, this has never been done. Yeah. How many times someone sat down, now you need to restore and talk through other than the fake say you're sorry apology.
Yeah, just forcing somebody,
Yeah, forcing someone to say, well, say you're sorry to this person. Well, the angry apology actually makes it 10 times worse.
Yeah, sure. Is that one of the facts? It's actually 10 times. We measured that. Measured that.
Right. The inauthenticness of the insincere apology from a kid during a time just because you want the situation to be end and over and have closure to it when they're not ready is not helping the situation. So we're going to talk a little bit through why and how that looks for the restoring and repairing part, which is actually the teachable part of the boundaries.
Yeah. Well, I was just thinking it's so important to discipline in general because it builds deeper relationships too. And I think the kids that are needing something to be restored and repaired are probably the kids that need relationships the most. And this is a really great way, instead of just trying to punish the badness out of them, which is kind of what we've done for a long time.
Yeah.
This is a really great way to help build that relationship and to show kids that you're still really on their side. You may not agree with like the thing they did, obviously, if we're in this moment, but like, I think to show them that you're really on their side, you're somebody that's in it with them for the long haul, because you probably are, whether you really love to be or not. If you're a teacher in a classroom and you've got a really tough student that or a student that had a really tough time, not even if they're a really tough student, but they just had a really tough time for whatever in your class, instead of just being like, oh, like now I've got to endure them for the rest of the year, which you can feel like that. I get that. But, this hopefully helps them believe that you're, really a part of it and that you're in it with them. And I think the relationships help us as teachers understand them better, right? So when we go through the restoring and repairing process, part of that is this processing of why something even happened in the first place and getting to the heart of the matter, which helps us just basically understand the kid better. And when we understand the kid better, that's going to increase our empathy and hopefully shows the student what empathy looks like. And the better that we understand our students, the more preventative we can be. And we talked about that a lot in that last episode. Like if you know your students well, you can actually be preventative and you can keep them from having these moments that boil over, or that something, not great happens, or there's a crisis or whatever, because you know them so well that you're able to help prevent. And so the more preventative we are and the better relationships we have, then actually the less we have crisis in the first place.
Yeah. This is really that plan B that Dr. Oscarine talks about.
Yes.
It's that.
So what does that mean? Like, yeah.
So when we talk about plan B, it's that you have the empathy step, like listening to the kid's point of view from the problem, the adult concern. So you addressing your concerns about what had happened. And then that last phase is the coming up with a collaborative plan together, the collaborative proactive solutions together. And that you both are okay with those boundaries, that you are giving them some voice and what's happening, but it has to be something you're okay with too.
Yeah. Yeah. Like if the kid's plan is like, nothing happens to me, you like, that's not the plan, right?
Yeah,
Like, you'd be like, well, that's actually not going to work for me.
Yeah. But it's so important to ask that empathy step. Listening to our kids and having them, teaching them how to voice their feelings, because obviously we weren't able to do that when the crisis happened. Teaching them how to voice their feelings, and then listening to your concerns as someone that loves them. Here's my concern about what you were doing. And then coming up with a plan together, that collaborative, that part, as we look at restorative practice, that's the part we're going to do with kids.
Yeah. I think I think especially older students, this is real crucial. It's crucial across the board, but I think especially with older students who have maybe a little bit more self-awareness, high school, even middle school probably, but they are able to, they usually have some of these people, like right in a high school, whether it's in counselors or things like that. Not that younger grades don't have those, or younger schools don't have those, but I think you end up having like those certain people that are like that person for kids at a high school. And goes back to some episode that we talked about this way earlier. If we're always constantly shipping kids out to like whoever that person is that's really good at doing that, we shouldn't be surprised that we don't have a good relationship ourselves with a kid. But what those people so often do, whether it might be a principal, like a unit principal, like a family principal, whatever it might be, those people are taking the time to sit down, have the conversation with the kid, and figure out something usually together. And then those students have buy-in to that person. Yeah. And I think that, again, so much of that comes down to time, but I think it's super important. That's one of the reasons why I think we'll talk about this later, but I think time is such an important thing, because we tend to run out of it as teachers, it seems like.
Yeah, as you're talking about the principal thing, I think one of my biggest challenges is coming in as an administrator, as a principal, is that this mindset that kids are like, don't talk to the principal, or families will say, oh, they had to talk to you. And I'm like, I think changing the persona of what a principal is one of our biggest challenges right now, because really it should look like I'm a safe person for you to solve problems and talk to with, that it shouldn't be a fear of coming to the principal's office
Sure,
or
that equals trouble. Yeah.
that equals trouble, or the principal called. Hopefully I'm talking to you about other things. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I think that perception or the role of the principal really is a dynamic thing.
Would you say you're trying to put the pal back in principal?
No, maybe that's
I feel like
where.
that's what you're saying.
Is that your dad joke for today?
Yeah, I don't know. It's episode 11. I have no idea. I'm just saying things at this point.
Yeah.
All right. So what does this look like? What is the restoring and repairing? Let's get back on track. What does the restoring and repairing look like?
Yeah. Okay. So I think we would use this part when it's kid to kid conflict, like you're going to have a mediator, right? Like that after kids have had conflict, whether it's verbal or physical altercation or whatever it may be, having a facilitator, a trusted adult, sit down and talk to each kid individually. Hey, I'm just so you know, we're never just going to put kids in a room and say, okay, we're going to talk about this.
Yeah, figure it out.
That's a bad idea. And we do that a lot.
Yeah.
More so than we should. Can you imagine if someone did that to you? Just, you had a conflict with a friend. Someone's like, no, you two are going to talk about it right now. Let's go. And you're like, oh, I wasn't ready for that.
Sure.
Yeah. So I think talking to each kid individually and preparing them that we're going to bring you guys together and this is going to happen. And it may, again, we're going to talk about time, but things aren't going to be closed up within a 24-hour cycle sometimes. Sometimes it takes a week to get some of that together. And then bringing the kids together and allowing them to talk and authentically share their feelings. I have been so impressed with children and their ability and capacity to do this. I think people are afraid or I'm not sure they can do that. The conversations, I wish, obviously for confidentiality, we can't get into like weeds too much about things that happen. But man, just beautiful conversations that kids are able to have and share. And they are like hugging each other or, hey man, I'm really sorry I messed up and no problem. Like children are so forgiving and empathetic that we don't give them enough credit. I also put kid to adult. We also skip this too. Like kids, a kid and a teacher have a conflict. Sometimes you have to act as a facilitator to get them back on track to be able to re-enter the classroom, to be okay with coming back for the tier 1 instruction or going back to their specialist. That we need to have the teacher have a voice about how they're feeling about the child. Same scenario, have a facilitator, have the kids share and allow that time for them to come back and process about what the plan's going to be now.
Yeah.
Here's what our ownership in both of this is and then how I'm going to repair it. Thinking about the classroom community, things happen in our classroom like, hey, recess, this happened at recess today. Gaga pit got crazy. This is not.
If you don't have a Gaga pit,
get one.
You shouldn't get
one.
It's a terrible.
It's like a Fight Club ring for kids with the paw. It's intense. But like whatever it is, classroom communities. I just modeled that this week. Really letting kids express their feelings, talk through them, the options to pass. It could be proactive circles and it could be a reactive circle. So thinking about that. And then sometimes it's adult to adult. We have two, as an administrator, sometimes I have two professionals that just can't get on the same page and it's talking to them both separately and then bringing them together to help conflict resolution or like come up with some proactive plans so we can start working together on the benefit of the kids. So
yeah, I agree. I think that this is, a step that we skip too often, and it's really we shouldn't skip it. But it's a lot of times it's the more uncomfortable thing. Sometimes everything leading up to this just happens, and we just do it. And then with this, we have time to think about it, so it makes it worse in our minds. Like we all of a sudden are stuck, and we like dread it, or we worry, or we come up with all kinds of scenarios in our head. So we just skip it. And I don't think we can. So a couple things that you said that I thought were really good. A conversation, right? Like this is two ways. We can't, especially with adult to kid, we can't like sit a kid down and be like, okay, now we're going to have this conversation. But then we just talk right at the kid. They don't get a chance to talk. And all they get a chance to do at the end is like, well, do you have anything else to say? Or something like that, and you're like, well, I mean, it wasn't really a conversation. That was just, could have sent me an email and that would have been the same thing. So make sure it's actually a conversation. Like make sure there are questions that are being asked and that you're really trying to get insight from the kid. Because if you're not getting insight from the kid, you're missing more than half of the story. Yeah. Right. You could be missing almost all of the story, depending on what the situation was.
Yeah. And there's restorative practice questions. If you Google, you can find there's 5. Like I'm sure Josh can drop that in the link below. But like there are restorative practice questions. If you need a framework, there is a framework that you could use if you need that guidance, right?
Yeah. I think another thing too, with when you're an adult with a student is just for the adult to be genuine. which sounds easy, but I think that we've all probably experienced like adults or teachers, and when you hear them, like you can talk to them as a colleague and they talk one way, and then all of a sudden you watch them talk to a student, whether it's a kindergartner or a fifth grader or a high schooler, and then they like talk different. Like all of a sudden they're like using like their teacher talking, you know, and you're like, well, that's weird. Like the kid's going to pick up on that. They've heard normal human adults talk before. So if and you still have to, I mean, be appropriate, like for whatever age level. And obviously you're still a teacher and they're still a kid, but I think to be able to be genuine makes such a big difference. And I think especially as kids get older, it almost becomes slightly offensive and they're very aware that they're being talked down to instead of being like just genuinely talked to as a person. So you have to be really conscious of that. Practice being, it does make you almost have to be a little bit vulnerable to like not be on, I guess, you know, like you're not necessarily on as your teacher persona, or, you know, your adult, whatever. Like, I just think that it's important to be really genuine in these moments because it's going to make the kids feel like they can be genuine as well. And I think, that we need to tell kids like how we felt in a situation. I think that goes a long way.
And be really genuine. Like I was anxious. I feel anxious about this.
Yeah, it makes me worried. Like when all of a sudden this was happening. So then I decided to do this because I was thinking this could happen.
Yeah.
Or it would lead to this result. Kids are super receptive. And I think, again, that it would make sense for this to happen with older kids for sure. This is a step I think we skip a lot with younger kids and we sell them a little bit short. Like they can't get it. They wouldn't get it. And I think it's actually super important for us to tell kids the whys behind what we did and how we were thinking. One, it humanizes us, right? I think especially for littler kids, we're like, we live at a school, they think, and we don't leave.
Yeah.
And somehow that's where we live, and it blows their mind if they see us at like a grocery store.
I've had kids run away from me at the grocery store.
Run away from you? What were
Yeah.
you, what were you doing?
They just told me, like, wait, no, you're supposed to live at school.
I've run away from kids at a grocery store before. I've hidden an aisle. I'm sure everybody's done that before. But I think like that's super important, like to help make them realize that we're people too, and that we make decisions. Sometimes those are good decisions. Sometimes we wish we could change the decision we made, right? So, but I think walking them through our thought process is really important. And then part of that restoring and repairing is what we might typically refer to as consequences. So I think it's important, like language-wise, for us to be on the same page while we're talking about this. So this restoring and repairing, some of that's going to be like the consequences of the actions. But sometimes if we're just saying restoring and repairing, people are like, there's no consequences.
Yeah.
Well, there is, like, this is like the result, right? You can't think of consequences. If you're thinking of consequences as how somebody got in trouble, then yes, maybe that's not what
you're
this
talking
is.
about punishments.
Yes. But if we're talking about consequences as the result of an action, okay, well, there was an action. Now this is the result that happens because of that action. That's a consequence, right? And we are just happening to say that part of that's restoring and repairing. But I think if we're not talking about the same things, people can or same language, people can easily think, well, they're just saying there's no consequences now.
Yeah.
Or anything goes. And that's not the case. So I mean, like simple things, right? Like a kid calls somebody a name. Mm-hmm. Maybe they end up having to write an apology, or maybe they have to come up with like 5 positive things about that other kid. Mm-hmm. Thinking about that's probably like elementary-ish or whatever. Mm-hmm. But, you know, I think those kinds of things, that's still a consequence, right? Mm-hmm. Now, did the kid just get in trouble and have like, no, but like they had to repair and restore the relationship through the consequence.
Yeah. I would say some of our kids that we've worked with, having to process what had happened and actually make the repair is the hardest thing for them.
Sure.
So it would be so easy for me to say, all right, you don't get to go out to recess tomorrow for some non-logical thing that you did, right? Earlier, that's like an easy pass for them. But I'm like, now tomorrow you're going to have to address your feelings. You're going to have to process and talk through this with somebody.
Yeah, that's worse.
That is hard for kids and is a much harder. It would be super easy for me to just be like, oh, so no recess for you tomorrow. That will solve that problem about you calling somebody's name, right? Like, totally not related. But having kids, we've seen kids struggle where we've had to write out maybe some dysregulation of the fact that they have to process their feelings and talk to this kid when they don't want to, maybe. But sometimes that's a more powerful and more logical consequence than just doing this prescribed playbook of whatever that you may have.
Well, it makes kids do the very thing that we're kind of terrible as adults at doing, right? I like really taking a good hard look at ourselves, understanding that our actions have consequences towards others and impact others, and that we chose to impact somebody negatively. Those are terrible things. That's why we don't do that as adults. Like, we're terrible at that as adults because we don't want to have to face up to the fact that maybe we're not that perfect. And like, there's all kinds of feelings that come along with that. But I think if we can teach kids how to do that, and that it's okay, A, it's okay to make mistakes. B, people are forgiving if we are willing to own up to the mistakes that we make. Hopefully. But I think for kids, like they interact with that, they see that in our experience, and they see that people are forgiving. And then a lot of times, not always, but a lot of times it bridges the gap and we don't have a lot of those issues again. It actually saves us so much time in the long run. We think that this is all going to take us a lot more time, which it does. I mean, it takes us time, but I think it actually saves us so much time and effort in the long run if we teach kids how to do this the right way, instead of, again, like, you tore up a paper that you didn't want to do, so now you don't get to go to recess. Well, those aren't connected. Like, maybe they have to like redo the work. Yeah. And the only time for them to be able to do that is at recess. But like, there's like a connection to the action, as opposed to just like, well, now you don't get to go to recess and you have to stand here on a wall and look at a wall.
Yeah. Because
now you'll learn. Like,
yeah, that will solve the problem. Though I bet you that kid probably will never do that again.
Yeah. Yeah, or it's the same kid with their face
every single day who actually needs to go outside and run around.
Well, yeah.
That's working.
Okay, so what are some of the challenges? Like, as we start doing this kind of work, the restoring and repairing, what are some of the challenges that you would anticipate people facing, or that we have faced?
Yeah, I would say refusal from participants, adults and kids refusing to participate in the process. That could be a challenge. Things not being repaired after discussion. So I think we've experienced this, that we're going to have this restorative conversation. These two are going to be great now. 2 weeks later, another conflict between the two kids, right? So just to know that this isn't the end all be all, it's a stepping in the right direction. But sometimes you're revisiting things with the same group of kids or same student and adults, often, that it's not a one-time, well, we've had this lovely conversation, you're all good for the rest of the year, put my energy somewhere else. So I think that's a misconception. Judgment from others. Man, do we see this? I feel this. People think you're not doing anything, or, they assume there is, like you addressed before, that there isn't any consequences. And actually there were consequences. We're just not getting on the PA and announcing to everybody, hey, just let you know, I dealt with issue 52 today, and this is how it outcomes. Yeah. It's like the Hunger Games, right? Like, we're not getting on, and it's just really confidentiality. It's really nobody's business, less people that are involved, and I think that's really important. Sure. But there's some judgment of people not understanding or not thinking, because you're not seeing kids being publicly shamed, that there aren't consequences or things aren't being handled. It's just that, hey, Karen, you don't need to know about it, right? It's kind of thing. Time. Again, time. Yeah. It takes time. It's a process. It's not going to be wrapped up so you can move on to the next 20 things on your list and by the next school day. There's times where it's taken me a week or week and a half to kind of really get something kind of resolved, or it's taken time. And I think you have to allow the time to happen and prioritize some time to do that, and have the time protected.
Well, I think sometimes you have to wait too. I think that's always important. You have to wait till people are kind of ready. And that doesn't mean you just push it off forever, but sometimes if it, was something that was a little bit of a bigger deal or seemed to impact somebody else in a big way, it may not be like that same day. It may not even be the next day. You may have to give it 3 or 4 days before you sit down with kids, or again, with adults even. I think it's awkward. Yeah, and you kind of touched on this. People will be apprehensive at times, but I think part of that's because it's awkward. And I think especially when it's kid to kid and we're kind of facilitating that, I think the biggest thing that you can do is, you can say like, hey, this might feel awkward. Call it out and say it, so that it's not like, oh, you shouldn't be feeling awkward about this and you should just do it. Like, you can say like, hey, this might feel awkward for us to sit down and have to talk about it, but this is an important step of relationships and of existing with others. Even if you guys aren't going to be like best friends or something, like, you still have to exist in maybe the same class or certainly the same school. So let's sit down. Let's It'll be awkward, but it's going to be fine, and we'll talk you through it, and we'll help you go through it. I think the same thing can be said for adults. Sometimes adults to kids, if you're facilitating that, we've both facilitated that where we've had adults sit down with kids, and to be able to say at the beginning, hey, it's a little weird to have to talk about this, isn't it? Like we know that it's a little bit weird to have to talk about this, but I think it's important that you know how Mr. or Mrs. whoever felt. And you may have to do that. You may have to even walk the adults through the process to say, well, how did you feel? Tell, Billy Bob over here, like, how did you feel?
Yeah.
I don't know, where am I at in our country where this student's name is Billy Bob?
I don't know.
What demographic do I think I'm speaking to right now?
Yeah, not where we live. But
I don't know. So anyway, but like that was my example of a name.
Yeah.
But I think you might have to walk people through that because it is awkward, and people, like we've said, adults have not gone through this. We're terrible at it. We need somebody to potentially walk us through. Yeah. It's important that you let yourself be in the awkward moment enough to where you realize that it's going to be okay and you come out on the other side, and hopefully you can show and be like that non-awkward kind of regulating presence in this whole thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we continually, people that avoid, and then we have kaboom, and we wonder why we're now in crisis because we're not doing, like, even this is we're talking about postvention, like after the crisis. This also can be very preventative for the next crisis. So if we keep on avoiding it, we're just building it up. And I think, how awkward is it when you've had a conflict in your classroom, the teacher's upset, the kid feels it, right? Like that relationship's damaged. And then we just send them back in and assume this is going to go well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, everybody will figure it out.
They'll figure it out. We never work that part out. And it's just like, we're not doing your building culture or climate or system any justice at all if we just keep on continuing to skip the really hard part, which is then figuring out what our feelings are and talking about them.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. All right. So how do we actually start to prioritize this and embed it in our schools?
Yeah, I think this is the step that needs to be part of when you have to start writing discipline policy. This needs to be part of the discipline policy. I know we've added it in as we've started reforming stuff in our own building, that this is part of the process that needs to happen. Or if we write a crisis plan for a kid, part of the process needs to happen. It needs to be very intentional in your policy and the way you handle conflict. It's a step in the process.
Sure.
Don't skip it. Training. So we talk about this restorative practicing or these conversations, or even if you're looking at Dr. Ross Green's process, we got to train people. We got to talk about what that looks like, model it, mock conversations, have people be able to facilitate. So we need some training, coaching and modeling to be that for somebody. Yeah. Sometimes it's just good for somebody to watch you do it. So you're a model or a coach for that, or, hey, I'm going to have this conversation with this kid. Why don't you come in and join me? Yeah. So you can kind of see how this goes.
Yeah, a lot of learning happens then.
Yeah, that's to me the best. And then the reflective conversation after it happens, follow up. Like, how did you think that went? How are you feeling about that? Some of those things to help get that off the ground and getting to start prioritizing that with your building.
Yeah, I agree. I love those leading by example too. I think that if you have conflict that exists or whatever, if you can start being somebody that just does it, that can be huge. Because what's going to happen, honestly, is you're going to have a room that just runs. There are a lot of people that do this already without like all the verbiage that goes with it. Like they wouldn't say that if they're restoring and repairing. They're like, well, I just always pull kids aside to have a conversation. Like that's kind of what I do. You can probably recognize the people that already do a lot of this stuff naturally in your schools because their rooms, they're the ones that kids like to go to. They're the period of the day that the students look forward to. They're the period of the day at a high school that in between at lunchtime, like they end up in this teacher's room. Like there's a group of 5 or 6 of them in that teacher's room all the time. People are stopping by to talk. Well, it's because this person has created this situation where people feel comfortable and safe and things like that. Elementary school wise, I think these are the rooms that just run really well. Like you're going to be able to identify these people. So if you're leading by example and you're practicing this, I think 1, start putting words to it. 2, don't just, because people can get really bad about just saying like, well, they're just really great with, with tough kids. That teacher is. And it's such a cop out because then what it means is I don't have to be.
Yeah, they've
right?
got.
They just are.
They'll
They're
just
really
take,
good. They
they'll
must
just take the kids.
Must have just been born that way. Like, I don't know. Like, they're just better than everybody else at this. Well, like, that's fine. And people probably do have tendencies that lean or like that allow them to be a little bit better at this, like, naturally. But that doesn't mean it can't be learned and it can't be implemented. So I think that that's important. So lead by example, but start putting verbiage to it and start like talk about some of the practical things you do that work, that you've recognized work. Because I think when you do that, it's going to make it really clear that other people can do it too. And also be willing to talk about that it was awkward, or that, oh man, then it didn't work that great. Because sometimes we look at those people and we're like, oh, but they're like the best at it. They always do it well. I don't even want to try or start because I'll mess it up. Well, you have to tell people about your failures too, and things that you don't do well, or times that it didn't go the way you that you thought. And again, I think time, that's my other big thing. I think be willing to give time. We've talked about this again in some other episode. By episode 11, I don't know what episode was what anymore. But which I guess is how this works. I guess moving forward, right? But I think if you're an administrator, I think be willing to find ways to offer time for people to do this with kids. It's important. If you're a teacher, recognize the value in it. We have about 1,000 things that we're asked to do. And it is hard to pull the trigger on saying, I'm going to take some of my time when I could be getting something else done, or where I could give myself a 10-minute break to just not think and do this with a kid. But I think most people got into education because they wanted to impact kids. And most people didn't get into education because they were like, man, my passion in life is just to teach math. And I don't care who it's to.
Yeah.
I don't care if
Anyone.
it's to somebody at a senior center.
Yeah.
I don't care, if it's really smart gorilla at a zoo. Like, I don't care. I just love teaching math. Like, you want to impact kids in some way, shape, or form. And I think this is one of the things that can do that, is when you take the time to have these kind of tough conversations and these restorative conversations and figure this stuff out. Again, it builds those deeper relationships. So it's worth the time. And also give yourself grace. We talk about this a lot. I talk about this a lot, at least. Give yourself grace to not always have to be getting something done teaching wise, because most of your job doesn't involve just instruction. That's what we get pegged as a lot. But so much of our, it's like a third is like kind of the teaching, a third is the behavior.
Third is the social emotional learning. So give yourself a time to do the other third of your job. Yeah,
really the 2/3 of your job almost, right? I mean, it's most of it. So I think those are all really important things.
Yeah, I would agree. I think just the time part is really hard to embed that part. If you're a school administrator, think about your building schedule. How do you embed that into? And I think that's something we're looking at reforming in our building next year, to allowing more time. To be able to process.
You can't just say it. Like, that's what's hard, right? It's easy to say. It's easy to say any given time you're meeting with a group of teachers to say, like, well, no, take the time. Like, there's nobody in administration that'd be like,
the time?
do not take time to talk with kids. But like, you have to you got to somehow show up and prove that that's what you mean. Yeah. Not just saying it, because everybody's saying it. Everybody will say, take the time. Just like everybody says, self-care is important, right?
At some point, there's no more time left to take from.
But then at the same time, we're like, but there's no subs, so we really need you to show up. And you're like, well, which one is it? It's like, which is it? You can't say it. You have to somehow show that it's true, and that's what you really mean.
Yeah, I agree. And this
is no pressure, administrators.
Yeah, that's
not on me. I'm not an administrator.
This is how we build resiliency with kids, right?
Yeah.
Safe, trusted adults.
Absolutely. Okay, so I'm sure there's plenty more we could talk about with this, but from kind of wrapping up this episode 9, now episode 11, 61-part series, what's something you want people to walk away knowing specifically about this restoring and repairing part of this process? Yeah, I just said the essential thing that we have to do if we want to teach kids how to solve problems is give them the opportunity to solve problems, right? So that's so good. I like that. Yeah. Yeah, so that's it. And that this is what's going to change how our children interact with the world. I mean, honestly, if we're trying to kind of change or influence our culture, and this is going to give them tools for a lifetime. They're going to have conflicts with their spouse, with their friends, with do you have podcasts? My gosh, do you have conflict with your spouse? Never. Should we talk about that? Do we have time? No, we don't have time. We don't have time for that today. Yeah, never happens. But these are tools for a lifetime that we're teaching our kids. If we're looking at, sometimes you look at big district plans and are like, we want to create lifelong learners or like kids that have empathy, right? Okay, well then we need to start prioritizing teaching them how to do that.
So it's always like I see in every mission statement from school districts, right? This is what we want for our kids when they graduate from our school. Well, let's prioritize teaching them how to do that now. And this is the call of action.
Yeah, I think that's it. I'm going to steal yours. Then I just agree with you ultimately. I mean, I think that's really true though. Like we're so great at saying it and putting it in our, our mission statements and whatever. Like we've got to actually do stuff that makes this happen. And that's like culturally, that's like a hard shift in a district culture to shift. That's not just next year, like we'll just do it. I mean, you're talking about people who have potentially worked in any given district for years and years and years. And to shift that, it's like a years long process, right?
You got to be fearless to stand up there and be unwavering to lead that charge.
Yeah.
So
it's not easy.
Find your support network and have some courage to stand up there and say, this is what's happening and let's go.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
people are afraid to take the step.
Yeah. And I think, again, like going down onto more of a micro level, my big thing is, again, it's going to be awkward. It's going to be uncomfortable when you're doing this individually with kids. But be willing to do it and show them that they matter enough. It's going to show them they matter enough to have this extra conversation, to restore relationships, to repair relationships and situations. It's going to show, it just sets the tone for your room. Like it lets people know, lets kids know that they matter and that this all matters and that it's not just about production of, classwork. Yeah. That relationships matter.
Yeah. And how many of them have never heard that language at home? Unfortunately, they've never had an adult apologize to them. They've never, so to model that, because some of them have never experienced what restoring looks like or feels like, because it's not part of their home culture.
Yeah. That's hard. Yeah. So it's hard.
Yeah.
All right. Well, hey, episode 9.3/11. I don't know. Yeah. It's all meshing together, which it all does, I guess.
Right.
Ultimately. Well, we appreciate you being with us, hanging out with us, having the conversation with us.
Yeah.
It's always great. As always, we love to keep hearing from you. We want to hear more questions from you. We want to hear more comments from you, more ideas on what you'd like to hear us talk about, more ways that we've been wrong.
Yeah.
You throw those out there to us. Yeah. What you don't like about my voice, what you do, whatever it might be. We want to be able to hear from you. Yeah. Again, we have our contact information in the, I never know what to call it, like the summary, episode summaries and things like that. Reach out. Let us know if you're on Facebook, shoot us messages on there and things like that. But we just really appreciate you being a part of the conversation with us. And now let's go out there and do the work.
Let's go do it.
Hey everybody, let's keep the conversation going.
Like and subscribe below and keep the comments rolling.